Hello folks. This class is an opportunity that I would like you to have to round off, this very first part on Unit 1 to allow you to feel, ready to start with the analytical work that we are slowly beginning to embark ourselves on. So I would like to highlight some notions that are, present in different sections in the different sources that we're asking you to read, so as for you to have, this general panorama of what is important, and so that you're also able to, make connections across readings. And also, I am using additional material so as to better, present the topics and, allow you to have a true truly comprehensive panorama of the topics that we have dealt with so far. So I would like you to focus with me on this presentation that I am also taking from a course that I took myself in the year 2013, and it was on the very topic that we're dealing with these days, which is predicates and arguments. So of importance is that you remember that every sentence contains a predicative expression, a predicate, that may select for one or more constitutive elements. This is what is taken to be the default case, although we know that there are sometimes predicates that select for no predicate whatsoever, and they are the zero-place predicates. But in general, at least one referring expression or constitutive element or argument or role player is selected for by the predicative expression or predicate in question. These constitutive elements that are selected for by the predicative expression are what we call the arguments of this predicate that functions as predicator in any given sentence. Each predicate, as you have here in the last bullet point, determines how many and what type of arguments it needs so as for the predicate to be in a grammatical sentence. However, there are predicates that select for no argument, such as atmospheric verbs, like the ones listed here: rain, snow, amanecer in Spanish, anochecer. So all these sentences that you have under 1, A, B, C, and D, are instances in which you have a predicate, such as llover, which is zero place, selecting for no argument whatsoever. And then what you have as additional information is an adjunct, providing information that is required, at the level of pragmatics, at the level of language put to use, but only considering the semantic, load of llover. Llover by itself, sees its requirements met, satisfied. The thing is that we need the extra information, as in toda la noche o hasta muy entrada la noche, given the fact that we are, social beings that live in a community, okay? But semantically speaking, just considering the Spanish system in this case, the predicates llover and nevar select for nothing else but themselves in order for them to be in a grammatical sentence. Now, there are intransitive verbs, such as toser, reír, morir, salir, trabajar, correr. Intransitive here, we're not making the distinction between there being agentive or not. We're simply using the very first label associated with these verbs, which is intransitive. And therefore, we see in all the sentences listed under 2 that the elements underlined have been selected for by the predicates functioning as predicators, which are these verbal forms that have been listed here. Okay, so Juan tose sin parar, María se ríe a carcajadas, el perro murió anoche, Pedro salió a pasear, Mariana trabaja en la universidad, Juan corre todos los días durante 3 horas. This sin parar, a carcajadas, esta noche would be additional information not required by the very basic, semantic load of these predicates, but rather this is information that we as human beings, using language in specific contexts and communicating messages, need in order to, live as the social beings we are. Now we have transitive verbs, other than intransitive, also transitive. And here you have, for example, instances such as the verbal predicates romper, borrar, amar, saber, construir, you see, that require 2 arguments, the ones that have been underlined here in these sentences. So for the case of romper, for example, we have Juan and we have el vaso, which are arguments selected for by the semantics of romper. And the same with the other sentences, borrar, amar, saber, construir. And of course, within transitive forms, this would be the category monotransitive. And if you can think of the translations for these sentences, English behaves very similarly to Spanish. So you have break, erase, love, know something, build something. You see, so it's also monotransitive in that all these verbal predicates require a direct object only. You see, but they are, in terms of argument structure, 2-place, because they are selecting for not only the direct object, but also the subject, right? Okay. Now, in this case, ditransitive verbs pertain to verbs that have 2 objects, one direct object, the other one indirect object. But semantically speaking, the argument structure of verbs such as dar, donar, decir, prometer, obligar is 3-place, because not only do they select for 2 internal arguments, meaning 2 objects, but also an external argument, meaning a subject. Okay? So we have Juan le dio el libro a María, donó libros a la biblioteca, los libros, colocó los libros en el estante. So here you have an instance of el libro, and then María as 2 arguments, as 2 referring expressions. This preposition a is marking this argument as an indirect object. This donar libros a la biblioteca, this prepositional phrase is no longer an indirect object, but perhaps more elocutive. Colocó los libros en el estante. This is the case in which you have a direct object and then an obligatory adverbial, because you put something somewhere. This is what in English is called a complex transitive verb, right? Remember this. I will go now to the source that you can consult for you to study, for you to remember the, type of verb that a complex transitive verb is. So this is a source that I have already mentioned that we use in this class, that you don't have it as obligatory material for you to read because it is a source that is used in first and second year, particularly for your grammar classes in first and second years. But we are always, returning to this source because it provides very clear and very, student-friendly type of explanations. The source that I'm talking about is A Student's Grammar of the English Language by Grima Mamquerk. So I highly advise that you try, to get it. If you cannot get it online, you can always, there's no, urgency here, but when classes return to normal, you can always consult, this book when you go to our school's library. But so this is the source and I have acknowledged it, but talking about complex transitive verbs that I have just mentioned for my previous slides, here, this is section 16.24 in the book. This is the original page number 349. So complex transitive verbs, as a reminder for you guys, entail that two elements following the complex transitive verb have a subject-predicate relationship. So we have, she considered her mother a sensible woman, or she considered her mother to be a sensible woman, meaning you have a complex sentence in the sense that you have, she considered her mother, and then her mother to be a sensible woman. So here we can extract this section and say her mother was a sensible woman, you see? But instead of having a finite verb here, you have it in the form of an infinitive verb, of a non-finite verb. So in any case, you have a direct object, her mother, and what comes after this direct object, either in the form of a noun phrase like in a sensible woman, or in the form of a to infinitive clause, as in to be a sensible woman, is in this case an object complement, because it is saying something, getting back to her mother, which is in turn the direct object of consider, right? Now, another possibility for the complex transitive pattern is to have a verb like slip, like take, like I am trying to highlight the more evident cases. So let's concentrate on the first one here, in which you have the key as a direct object and into the rock as an adverbial, right? An adverbial or adjunct, as they prefer to call it, of place, which is obligatory in the sense of being required for in the meaning of slipping, because you slipped something somewhere, all right? Or with this use of keeping, for example. You keep your eyes somewhere. So in this meaning, in this instance of meaning of keep, you're not just keeping something, but you're keeping something somewhere. Therefore, this is a complex transitive verb in the sense that it requires not only a direct object, but also, in this case, an obligatory adverbial or adjunct. So the pattern for complex transitive verbs is that you have a direct object, first and foremost, And then you can either have, you know, an object complement, as it says here, or an adjunct or obligatory adverbial. This is what we have in English when we say that, for example, Juan put the books on the shelf. In this case, we're dealing with a complex transitive verb, and the pattern is verb, direct object. So you have a verb, a complex transitive verb, plus direct object, plus obligatory adverbial. Okay? Or obligatory adjunct. Okay. Now, as we saw last week, or as we saw in a previous video class, we know that when talking about predicates, semantic predicates, that is, and the theory that relates predicates and its arguments, or their arguments, we know that it's not just verbs that can function as, you know, predicators, the predicates functioning as predicators in simple sentences, but also adjectives, also nouns, prepositions, adverbs, right? They can also be classified as per the number of arguments and the type of arguments that they select for. Here you have this definition. Right, so in general, a noun is zero place. Therefore, a noun is not is generally a zero place type of predicate, for it selects for no argument in general. Example nouns: mesa, silla, libreta, Maria, lluvia, etc. However, there are certain, you know, a small group of nouns that entail a relationship between entities, such as author, such as brother, father, you see, book, son, daughter, right? So in this case, they have an argument structure of their own, because when we speak of a book, we understand that there is an author, right? That we can associate with the book. So book is, in this case, a one-place predicate functioning as predicator in a sentence only if we had it as este libro es de Cortázar, right? Libro would be the noun, right? Functioning as the predicator of the sentence contains this non-verbal predicate, but at the same time, libro has a selection of arguments, in this case Cortázar, and we see the employment of the preposition so as for us to have a Spanish sentence, right? We cannot have este libro es Cortázar, right? But the importance is not so much the sentence as such, but rather the idea that you understand that sometimes nouns have an argument structure of their own. Of course, when nouns derive from verbs, as in construcción, deriving from construir, well, there's also a selection of an argument, in this case, la casa, right? In as much as we have an argument when we use, an internal argument when we use construir algo. Okay? All right. Adjectives can also be considered predicates that have an argument structure of their own. Prepositions mostly select for one argument. You have sobre, de alguien, para alguien, right? Entre una cosa y otra cosa, una entidad y otra entidad. Adverbs are generally not associated with an argument structure, right? But there are some, such as encima, debajo, delante, antes, o independientemente, que seleccionan un argumento, right? So in general, when you have curiosamente, o Juan está allá, o bebe moderadamente, right? There's no, an intrinsic selection of an entity, but in contrast, delante presupposes the existence of delante de algo. Encima presupposes the existence of an entity encima de algo. Okay. Now, continuing, of importance is what you have in Tulio's chapter, the section in which he tackles, information on the subject. So, as a syntactic function, first of all, subject as a syntactic function, this constituent that performs this function appears to be an argument selected for by a specific type of verb, although there are certain subjects that are not selected for by any verb. So in terms of the syntactic category that this function subject is associated with, we can come across a noun phrase, right? A pronoun, or an infinitive clause. Also, this is a specific type of terminology in Spanish that points to the existence of, sentences, nominal sentences as subjects. You're right? It is sintagma complementante. We're not going to worry about this term, but what you must remember is the following. El libro de Juan is a full noun phrase that performs the function of subject here. Juan is a proper noun. Él is a pronoun, right? All possibilities for, a category that may perform the function of syntactic subject. Now, a sentence, que compres chocolate, una oración subordinada sustantiva, or a subordinate nominal, that nominal clause, right? Or an infinitive clause, right? Una oración subordinada de infinitivo. Ir a comprar chocolate is an infinitive clause, una cláusula de infinitivo, as this slide says, or we can also speak of oración. Oración no conjugada de infinitivo. Okay, there is a structural mark that allows us to identify which is the constituent that is performing the syntactic role of subject. And the most important mark is the agreement that there exists between the subject and its corresponding finite verb. So here we have this specific mark, o, in trajo, which enables us to understand that there is agreement between this subject, Juan, and the verb. Now we have ron here as an inflectional morphology that allows us to understand that it is a coordinated, subject that we're dealing with. Juan y Maria, a plural subject, therefore the inflectional features in the verb change. Now, subjects in Spanish do not take up, a fixed position or is not as fixed as in English. So we can have usted afirmó eso ayer, eso lo afirmó usted ayer, afirmó eso usted ayer. So we have usted, in different positions in the sentences, illustrating the point that subjects in Spanish do not take up a fixed position or as fixed a position as in English. When we have a pronoun performing the syntactic function of subject, the case that the pronouns show is, connected to what we have already seen tackling Pinker's chapter, a nominative pronoun or a pronoun showing nominative case. So, él shows nominative case, for it is the subject in this sentence. Now, there is also a fundamental characteristic of subjects in Spanish and in other Romance languages such as Italian and Portuguese, which is the possibility of having sentences that at the level of surface structure have no subject whatsoever. So we have these, example sentences here. This one is with the verb of atmospheric conditions, llover. This is the verb an impersonal, meaning non-agentive use of the verb haber, which different from the situation with llover, which does not select for any arguments. You see, it is a zero place. This one is a one place because it does select for, a direct object. But what it does not select for is an agent, right? And this is an instance in which we have no canonical realization of the subject as a nominal constituent, but rather we can retrieve it from the verbal inflections. So we can understand that it is a yo that we're talking about given the inflectional features of the verb that we have here in use. Right? So here it's like a list of possibilities. Here there's no subject whatsoever, in that this is an impersonal sentence with a verb, llover, whose predicate functioning as predicator is zero place. Right? Now, here we have a verb like haber, which is impersonal, in that it has no syntactic subject, like in the case of llover. There is no agentivity involved, right? But it is a one-place predicate selecting for a direct object. An argument which is performing the syntactic function of direct object. Semantically speaking, we can speak perhaps of an experiencer, right? And in this case, we have a sentence that does select for, an argument which is agentive, right? So does select for an agentive argument, right? Different from haber, but is not canonically here. It doesn't have the canonical, this subject doesn't have the canonical realization as a nominal constituent, but rather we can retrieve it from the verbal inflection. So we don't see it explicit at the level of surface structure, but we know it is selected for by the meaning of venir. The thing is that Spanish is a type of language that allows for the dropping of this, subject, given the inflectional features that the verb has, and allowing for, therefore, the retrieval of the reference, of the referent, of the subject that is not canonically represented by means of a nominal constituent in preverbal position. Okay, so this property is very, very, important, crucial in this model, theoretical model of study and analysis called principles and parameters. As a principle of, this universal grammar, is postulated that all sentences have a subject, be this subject an argument, of the verb or not, with or without an explicit phonetic realization, right, at the level of surface structure. So this is the realm in which Spanish and English really diverge. For in, English, we have it rains, as opposed to llueve mucho, hoy. Hoy and mucho are adverbials, but there's nothing equivalent to it, that we do have in English. And there are many guests in the party. We have many guests in the party. And then we have the obligatory, as we do have muchos invitados en la fiesta in Spanish, but then we have this obligatory employment of the grammatical subject, the expletive pronoun there, and because this preverbal subject position ought to be filled in English, in contrast to what plays out, in Spanish. There's nothing prior to the verb, finite verb I. So the English case shows that beyond the semantic selection of what the predicate, selects for semantically, it is necessary that all sentences have an explicit subject, be it an argument, which is not exemplified here, or not, which is exemplified here. This is not an argument of rain, nor is there an argument, but an expletive pronoun. In Spanish, since it is a lengua de sujetos nulos, does not have explicit expletive subjects, as in English, which does not mean that it ought to be understood as an absence of a subject altogether. Because the same general prerequisite that applies to English, that all sentences must have a subject, be it an argument or not, applies to Spanish, right? The thing is that subjects in Spanish may have, no explicit phonetic realization at the level of the surface structure. So, as I explained in my previous video, even when Spanish shows no expletive pronoun before llueve, what is theorized is that there exists at the level of deep structure, a null pronoun that helps explain the morphological features that the verb takes, and that helps explain that it only takes these features and not some other morphological features. The same for I impersonal, right? Now, in the cases in which the verbs, right, do have an argument structure, that selects for a subject that is an argument and that is agentive, as in llegar, as in trabajar, as in decir, when we don't have an explicit pronoun at the level of surface structure, we can understand that it has been, elided because there's something else at the level of the surface structure that allows us to recover it, which is the inflectional morphology of the verb in use, right? But it's not, so it's simply a no mention. It is a sujeto tácito, desinencial, contextual, different from these two options here, in which there's no agent whatsoever, there's no, selection for an argument that is the doer of these, situations, but there's the postulation that there must be, a null pronoun involved at the level of deep structure that helps us explain the morphology that the verbs show.